والحاكم الثاني كلام رسوله ما تم غيرهما لدي إيمان فإذا دعوك لغير حكمهما فلا سمعا لداعي الكفر والعصيان قل لا كرامة لا ولا نعمى ولا طوعا لمن يدعو إلى طغيان وإذا دعيت إلى الرسول فقل لهم سمعا وطوعا لست ذا عصيان.
بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. أما بعد, our khatira today is about whether maslaha can be used as a justification to commit kufr. When justifying the kufr of voting in Western countries, they often invoke maslaha, which is a principle in usul translated as public interest or benefit. The same justification is used when entering parliaments of kufr or voting for those who legislate kufr or supporting the laws of jahiliyyah. They use it to justify the tahakum to a taghut or to undermine Islamic principles of wala and bara. It even extends to voting on kufr constitutions like what they did during the time in Egypt, during the time of Mursi, or willingly taken an oath to uphold a kafir constitution or a constitution of kufr. In each case, they attempt to justify this kufr in shirk with maslaha. And I'll keep it simple and clear and provide the general rule on the examples that I gave as well as anything similar. When it comes to any statement or action that constitutes kufr, one cannot commit major shirk or major kufr under the pretext of maslaha or its sister related excuse of darura. The verse is clear. من كفر بالله من بعد إيمانه إلا من أكره وقلبه مطمئن بالإيمان. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, من كفر بالله من بعد إيمانه. Whoever disbelieved in Allah after his belief, they get a punishment. It's mentioned at the end of the verse. فَعَلَيْهِمْ غَضَبٌ مِّنَ اللَّهِ وَلَهُمْ عَذَابٌ عَظِيمٌ. They get the wrath of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and a great torment. There's an exception within that verse. إِلَّا. إِلَّا حرف استثناء. إِلَّا means except. It indicates that something is excluded from the general rule or statement that was previously mentioned in that verse. In this context, the exception refers to those who are excluded from kufr and its punishment. إِلَّا مَنْ أُكْرِهِ. If they enter Islam, مَنْ كَفَرَ بِاللَّهِ مِنْ بَعْدِ إِيمَانِهِ. If they disbelieve after believing, there's an exception. إِلَّا مَنْ أُكْرِهِ. Except those who are forced, ikrah, coercion or duress. The exception in the verse is so precise and detailed that it clarifies that while sayings and actions may be exempted under genuine ikrah, the heart, however, is never exempted. وَقَلْبُهُ مُطْمَئِنٌ بِالْإِيمَانِ. The heart must remain firm and content with faith. There's no exception with the heart. Ibn Taymiyyah in the Fatawa and Ibn al-Qayyim in I'lam al-Muwaqqi'in both expressed very similar statements. They stated that there's an ijma', there's a consensus among the ulama that it's not permissible to utter a word of kufr except in the case of someone who's under ikrah, provided that the heart remains firm in faith, meaning there's no other exception to committing or saying any statement or act of kufr. Some people ignore the so many clear statements of Ibn Taymiyyah where he explicitly rejects allowing kufr except in the cases of ikrah. They misinterpret or take other words out of context, suggesting that he allows kufr in other situations other than ikrah. They need to get a grip. Before pulling random statements from Ibn Taymiyyah's work, they must study his entire body of work. For example, the statements of Ibn Taymiyyah that they use to argue that he allows kufr under the rule of the lesser of two evils. That needs to be understood by someone who truly comprehends his work, someone familiar with his style, in the context of what he's talking about. One must go through his entire body of work, extracting everything he said on that specific matter, as well as anything related to it, in order to truly understand his position on that issue. You can't pull random statements and interpret them to your liking. What he meant on this issue, for example, from the accumulation of his statements on the matter, is that the concept of using the lesser of two evils is an excuse for someone who's under ikrah. When there's a shar'i ikrah that applies to someone, and there's two possible outcomes, then yes, at that point, he can choose the lesser of the two because it's ikrah. Ibn Taymiyyah, in the context of discussing ikrah regarding the utterance of kufr versus ikrah in matters of marriage, he explained that if the disbelievers separate a man from his wife, they prevent him from reuniting with her unless he utters a word of kufr. He said it's not permissible to utter a word of kufr in such a scenario. One could argue that there's a great maslahah, there's a great benefit in reuniting with his wife. He can bring up the lesser of two evils. However, it does not reach the level of ikrah, therefore he cannot utter a word of kufr, as Ibn Taymiyyah correctly stated. So again, if the matter is an act or statement of kufr, the exception to committing that is ikrah. Maslahah is not an exception to diving into kufr, nor is darura. Now, the principle of maslahah that they use to allow kufr, the principle of promoting benefits, maslahah or masalih, and preventing or repelling harm, which is mafsada or mafasid, it's a fiqh or an usul fiqh principle, no doubt. But it must be applied properly within its appropriate context and boundaries. That principle is a lengthy topic on its own. But one thing is certain, and that is that maslahah, or what people perceive as maslahah, cannot serve as an excuse to commit kufr and shirk. A simple example of properly applying that principle is when a Muslim may forego an action that's recommended, a mustahab action, if carrying it out would lead to a greater harm, which is called a mafsada. This is among the matters where ijtihad comes into play. Let me provide an example of the proper application of this principle from our studies for those who follow us. And this aligns with the discussions that are found in the works of Al-Baghawi, Sharh al-Sunnah, and other scholars on when maslahah applies. In our tafsir class, we discussed the dispute over whether basmala should be recited aloud or quietly for an imam. In some of the masajid, reciting the basmala aloud has become a source of fitna, while in others, reciting it quietly is considered a source of fitna. This has been an issue for centuries. Some of the previous ulama specifically stated that when one fears a fitna, the principle of maslahah dictates that in such matters, one should follow the practice of the congregation to avoid a conflict or a fitna. I mentioned this during our tafsir class. The benefit, the maslahah of maintaining unity and preserving the hearts of the people and avoiding fitna in such matters of ijtihad outweighs the benefit of performing the recommended mustahab action in this case. Notice that saying basmala aloud or silent is classified as a mustahab, sunnah, It's a recommended act. It's not a principle of this deen or an aspect of tawheed. Some apply this principle to matters of tawheed and the core principles of this deen in order to commit kufr and shirk. And it's here that they deviate in their use of it. There are even those who go so far as to justify many acts of kufr and shirk simply by loosely and recklessly invoking the term maslahah as their proof, leading masses astray. Meanwhile, those who blindly follow without true understanding of the pure tawheed, yet believe they possess it, they nod in approval, mesmerized in accepting these flawed arguments by their shuyukh and even promoting them instead of hiding and burying them. This example I mentioned on Basmala is similar to how the Messenger ﷺ chose not to rebuild the Kaaba on the foundations of Ibrahim alayhi salam. The Messenger ﷺ prioritized the greater good, the maslahah of avoiding a fitna that might occur if the converts saw the Kaaba, which they held in high regard, being leveled and restructured in a different way. Those who use maslahah as an excuse for kufr and shirk use this hadith as well. And there's no doubt that it's an authentic hadith. It's in the Sahih, but it's not proof for them. The Messenger ﷺ did not leave the Kaaba as it was out of neglecting an obligatory command or compromising a required ruling, let alone a matter of tawheed. Restructuring the Kaaba was neither a principle of tawheed nor even an obligation or a wajib. It's not a matter of kufr in Islam or one of the fundamental principles of this deen. Let al-Bukhari and Ibn Hajar and others tell you what it falls under. Go back to what chapter al-Bukhari mentioned this hadith under. Bab man taraka ba'd al-ikhtiyar. Taraka ba'd al-ikhtiyar. مخافة أن يقصر فهم بعض الناس عنه فيقع في أشد منه. Al-ikhtiyar chapter, whosoever leaves optional things for fear that some people may not be able to understand them or that they may fall into something worse. The point is the discussion pertaining to restructuring the Kaaba falls under non-obligatory matters, under mustahab matters, not under tawheed and principles of the deen. Ibn Hajar in Fath al-Bari said the choice of restructuring the Kaaba is a matter that's a mustahab, not an obligatory one. And he added that the ruler may avoid actions that might provoke the public's rejection. He may avoid actions that may cause harm to their religion or worldly affairs as long as it does not involve abandoning clear obligations. I'll repeat, as long as it does not involve abandoning clear obligations. Imagine when it involves abandoning something at the core of this deen, at the core of tawheed. This hadith on the structure of the Kaaba should never be used as a precedent for altering a clear wajib, let alone allowing kufr and shirk. The numerous texts regarding the principles of tawheed are definitive, decisive, they're clear, they're not open for ijtihad. They cannot be compromised in the name of maslahah or the principle of attaining benefits, achieving benefits and avoiding harms, or imaginary hypothetical concerns, or imaginary fears that the shaitan instills in the hearts of those who make these excuses. Haqidah is tawqifiyya. It's based on text, and it's not subject to personal ijtihad. If this door was opened in such matters, it would lead to the complete obliteration of the fundamental principles of this deen. When the gates of maslahah were opened in matters of usul al-din and tawheed, as we see today, it led to the decline in the status of Muslims that we're witnessing today. We bring the Quran and the Sunnah in the practices of the Salaf as proof, and they counter it with maslahah. In matters of the principles of the deen, when they claim maslahah regarding, for example, disregarding the implementation of the Sharia, or ignoring certain aspects of it, or applying it gradually, or that there's maslahah in destroying and compromising on core beliefs like the principles of wala and bara, when others find maslahah in interfaith, and some who find maslahah in joining in salah with the Yahud and the Nasara, what remains of our deen after this? As some said, if following what they deem as maslahah means altering the ahkam based on changes in people and times and places, it would lead to the complete alteration of this entire Sharia, and it would lead to the introduction of a new Sharia that has not been established by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Their use of maslahah to justify committing kufr reminds me of the story of a woman who embraced kufr to dissolve her marriage from her husband. A tactic that even the shaitan himself may have not considered, as Ibn al-Mubarak stated. In Ighathat al-Lahfan, Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyya mentioned that they once asked Imam Ahmad about a woman who sought talaq from her husband. He refused. Some people known for their trickery advised her to do something that would lead her to leave Islam, to become an apostate, wal-'iyadu billah. And once she does that, the marriage would be dissolved. And she did it. A woman seeking khula' might claim that there's maslahah in leaving the marriage, especially an abusive marriage, or if her husband refuses to grant her talaq, or she can't find someone to give her a khula'. If she becomes a murtadda, she'll say the maslahah is in becoming a murtadda so my marriage can be dissolved, wal-'iyadu billah. This kufr and foolishness and trickery is no different from how maslahah is misused today to justify committing kufr in the examples that I mentioned in the beginning and in many other similar examples. It's become the hardest excuse to not only excuse kufr, but to give people and the tawaghit the green light to commit kufr. When they told Imam Ahmad about this woman, he became enraged. He said, whoever gave this fatwa is a kafir, and whoever is pleased with it is a kafir. Abdullah ibn al-Mubarak commented on this, said, I don't think even the shaitan could have thought of something like this until people came and taught it to him. In the next khatira, we're going to continue on this matter, insha'Allah. But we're going to keep it simple and brief and clear so everyone can understand it. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم.